What happened in Los Angeles during the summer of 1969 challenges everything the public was told about the Manson family murders. For over 50 years, authorities have maintained that 8 people died in those 2 horrific nights. But newly released FBI documents reveal a 9th person was present, someone who survived to witness the most disturbing truth about Hollywood's darkest secret. The official records were sealed until 2019, but what this survivor saw that night would expose a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power in America's entertainment capital. If you think you know the story of Charles Manson, prepare to have everything you believe shattered. This channel is only for those brave enough to handle the truth that powerful people have spent decades trying to bury. On the evening of August 8, 1969, Sharon Tate's rented mansion at 1050, Cielo Drive buzzed with the kind of casual elegance that defined Hollywood's elite social circles. The 26-year-old actress, 8 months pregnant with director Roman Polanski's child, moved gracefully through her living room, her flowing dress barely concealing her condition. With Polanski away in London working on his next film, Sharon had invited close friends for what should have been a quiet evening. Jay Sebring, Hollywood's most sought-after men's hairstylist, arrived early with his signature confidence and perfectly styled hair. His clientele read like a who's who of male Hollywood royalty. Steve McQueen, Warren Beatty, and countless others trusted him with their image. Sebring had once been romantically involved with Sharon, but had graciously stepped aside when she fell for Polanski, maintaining a friendship that spoke to his character. Abigail Folger, heiress of the Folgers' coffee fortune, brought an intellectual energy to the group. At 25, she was actively involved in social causes, using her considerable wealth to support civil rights organizations and other progressive movements. Her boyfriend, Wojciech Frykowski, was an aspiring screenwriter from Poland and a close friend of Polanski's from their European film circle. What none of them knew was that their movements had been carefully observed for weeks. Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old electronics enthusiast, had been visiting the property's caretaker regularly, installing and maintaining a sophisticated stereo system in the guest house. On this particular night, Parent had stayed later than usual, fine-tuning the equipment that would, ironically, later play a crucial role in what was about to unfold. But there was someone else on the property that night, someone whose presence would remain hidden from public knowledge for decades. Miguel Santos, a 22-year-old landscaper who had been working on the extensive gardens surrounding the mansion, had fallen asleep in a small maintenance shed after completing late-night irrigation repairs. Santos had immigrant status issues and often worked off the books for wealthy Hollywood clients, which explained why his presence went unreported in the initial police investigation. As the evening progressed, the friends settled into comfortable conversation, unaware that 4 figures were making their way up the winding driveway of Cielo Drive. Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian moved through the darkness with the confidence of people who had done this before. But what the world would never learn is that this wasn't a random act of violence born from Manson's twisted philosophy about starting a race war. 3 weeks earlier, according to Santos' testimony that wouldn't surface for 50 years, he had witnessed a meeting that would change everything we thought we knew about that night. While trimming hedges near the main house, Santos observed Sharon Tate in heated conversation with 2 men in expensive suits who clearly weren't from the entertainment industry. The men's body language was threatening, and Sharon appeared frightened, unusual for someone known for a gentle, trusting nature. What Santos overheard that day would haunt him for the rest of his life. The men were demanding that Sharon convince Polanski to abandon a film project he was developing, a project that apparently threatened to expose something that powerful people wanted to remain buried. When Sharon insisted she had no influence over her husband's professional decisions, one of the men made a statement that sent chills down Santos' spine. Then perhaps Mr. Polanski needs a more personal reason to reconsider his priorities. The conversation ended abruptly when Jay Sebring's car pulled into the driveway, but not before Santos heard one final exchange that would prove prophetic. The hippie cult leader we've been watching might serve our purposes. One man said the other. Sometimes the best way to send a message is to make it look like random violence. As midnight approached on August 9th, the massacre began with a brutality that shocked even seasoned Los Angeles homicide detectives. Stephen Parent, attempting to leave the property after his stereo work, became the first victim when he encountered the intruders at the front gate. But what happened next would challenge every official account of that night's events. Santos, awakened by the sound of gunshots, emerged from the maintenance shed to witness scenes that would forever be burned into his memory. From his hidden vantage point, he watched as the killers moved through the house with precision that suggested they had detailed knowledge of the layout and the occupants' routines. This wasn't the chaotic rampage of drug-crazed cult members. It was a methodical work of people following specific instructions. The most disturbing revelation Santos would later share was what he observed during Sharon Tate's final moments. According to his account, Susan Atkins spent several minutes alone with Sharon, not in the frenzied attack described in court records, but in what appeared to be an interrogation. Atkins was demanding information about film canisters, about meetings, about names and locations that Sharon clearly didn't understand. When Sharon repeatedly insisted she knew nothing about what Atkins was describing, the violence escalated. But even in her terror, Sharon maintained her innocence about whatever conspiracy had marked her for death. Santos watched in horror as the killers carved the word pig on the front door, not in a spontaneous rage the prosecutors would later describe, but as fulfilling a predetermined requirement. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, Santos made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Traumatized and terrified, he managed to slip away from the property before the bodies were discovered. His illegal status meant that coming forward would likely result in deportation. But more importantly, he had recognized one of the men from the earlier threatening meeting among the crowd of police and federal agents who responded to the crime scene. The man was now wearing a badge. The following night, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca would meet their fate in their Los Feliz home, victims of what appeared to be a continuation of the previous night's rampage. But Santos had seen enough to know that these weren't random killings driven by Charles Manson's apocalyptic fantasies. These were targeted assassinations disguised as cult violence, and the real masterminds were still walking free. What do you think was really happening in Hollywood during that summer of 1969? The connection Santos witnessed would prove to be just the beginning of a conspiracy that reaches levels of power most people can't even imagine. The official investigation into the Manson family murders became one of the most documented criminal cases in American history. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi built his case around the Helter Skelter motive, Manson's alleged plan to incite a race war that would ultimately put him in control of the surviving population. The narrative was compelling. The evidence seemed overwhelming, and the convictions that followed appeared to bring justice to the victims and closure to a traumatized city. But Miguel Santos knew differently. Hidden away in a small apartment in East Los Angeles, living under an assumed identity, Santos carried the burden of what he had witnessed that night. For months after the murders, he noticed vehicles following him, phone calls that ended in silence when he answered, and subtle warnings that made it clear his survival depended on his silence. The breakthrough came when Santos, working as a night janitor in a downtown office building, accidentally discovered documents that connected the dots in a way that terrified him. The building housed several entertainment industry legal offices, and late one night, Santos found papers that had been carelessly left in a conference room. The documents detailed payments made to various individuals for security consulting services during the summer of 1969, including several payments to known associates of Charles Manson. More disturbing were the photographs attached to some of the files, surveillance photos of Sharon Tate taken weeks before her death, along with detailed notes about her daily routines or friendships and her husband's current projects. One particular project kept appearing in the documents, a film Polanski was developing about child trafficking networks operating within the entertainment industry. The papers revealed that Sharon had been more involved in her husband's work than anyone realized. She had been conducting preliminary interviews with potential sources for the film, including several young women who claimed to have escaped from organized exploitation rings. These women had provided Sharon with names, locations, and details about a network that allegedly included several prominent Hollywood figures. Santos realized that Sharon Tate hadn't been killed because she was famous. She had been killed because she had become dangerous. The Helter Skelter narrative was the perfect cover story, shifting attention away from the real motive and onto the ravings of a charismatic cult leader. Manson may have ordered the killings, but someone else had ordered Manson. The documents included correspondence between various parties discussing the need to neutralize the Polanski problem before his film could expose what they called historical business relationships that were vital to ongoing operations. The language was coded, but the meaning was clear. Sharon Tate had to die to protect a network of powerful people involved in activities that would destroy them if exposed. One name appeared repeatedly throughout the documents, a name that Santos recognized from newspaper coverage of the investigation. The man wasn't just following the case. According to these papers, he had been instrumental in shaping the investigation's direction, ensuring that certain evidence was overlooked and that specific lines of inquiry were never pursued. Santos made copies of the documents before returning them to where he had found them. For weeks, he debated what to do with this information. Approaching the police seemed pointless if law enforcement was compromised at high levels. Going to the media felt equally dangerous, especially after he noticed that several journalists who had initially questioned the official narrative had suddenly stopped their investigations or had been reassigned other stories. The decision was made for him when Santos returned to work one evening to find his supervisor waiting with two men in expensive suits. Men who looked remarkably similar to those he had seen at Sharon Tate's house weeks before the murders. The conversation was brief and terrifying in its politeness. Santos was offered a choice: accept a generous payment and relocate to another country, or face the consequences of continuing to possess information that wasn't his to possess. Santos took the money and the new identity documents they provided, but he kept copies of the papers he had discovered. Over the following decades, he lived quietly in Mexico, working various jobs and never speaking about what he knew. But he never stopped following the case, and he never stopped collecting additional evidence when it became available. The most significant breakthrough came in 1994, when Santos learned that one of the young women who had spoken to Sharon Tate about the trafficking network had finally come forward with her story. The woman, now in her 40s, had provided detailed testimony to federal investigators about the network's operations. But within weeks of her testimony, she died in what was officially ruled a drug overdose, despite having been clean for over 15 years. Santos realized that the network Sharon Tate had died trying to expose was still active, still powerful, and still willing to kill to protect itself. The Manson family murders hadn't ended the conspiracy. They had simply provided the perfect distraction while it continued to operate. Thank you for staying with us through this disturbing revelation. What Santos discovered next would prove that the conspiracy was far larger and more organized than anyone could have imagined, involving not just entertainment industry figures, but political leaders and law enforcement officials who had spent decades protecting the real perpetrators. By 2019, Miguel Santos was a 72-year-old man living on a small pension in a coastal town in Mexico. He had watched from afar as the Manson case periodically resurfaced in popular culture, each retelling reinforcing the official narrative while ignoring the evidence he had carried for 50 years. But the 2019 release of previously classified FBI documents related to the case gave Santos the confirmation he had been waiting for and the courage to finally break his silence. The newly released documents contained several references to alternative suspect profiles that had been developed during the original investigation but never pursued. These profiles described organized crime connections to several entertainment industry figures, unusual financial transactions occurring the weeks before the murders, and witness statements that contradicted key elements of the prosecution's timeline. Most significantly, the documents revealed that the FBI had identified at least 12 individuals connected to various Hollywood production companies who had been under surveillance for suspected involvement in human trafficking operations. Several of these individuals had been in contact with Charles Manson and members of his family during the months leading up to the August murders. Santos realized that the time had come to add his evidence to the public record. He contacted a retired investigative journalist who had maintained an interest in the case, and over the course of several months, provided a complete account along with the documents he had preserved from 1969. The journalist's investigation revealed connections that were even more disturbing than Santos had initially understood. The trafficking network that Sharon Tate had been investigating wasn't just operated within the entertainment industry. It had developed sophisticated relationships with law enforcement agencies, political figures, and international criminal organizations. The evidence showed that Charles Manson, despite his later notoriety as a mastermind behind the murders, had been recruited specifically because his unstable personality and criminal history made him the perfect fall guy. The real organizers knew that Manson's bizarre theories about race wars and apocalyptic scenarios would capture public attention while deflecting scrutiny from their actual motives. Phone records from the summer of 1969, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, showed numerous calls between Manson family members and individuals connected to the entertainment industry figures who appeared in Santos' documents. Financial records revealed payments made to various family members through intermediary accounts, payments that were described as compensation for research services and security consulting. The most damning evidence came from a recording that Santos had managed to obtain through his janitor position, a recording of a meeting that took place in late July 1969, just weeks before the murders. The voices on the recording discussed the Tate problem and the need for a permanent solution that would eliminate the threat while providing suitable cover for ongoing operations. One voice on the recording, later identified through voice analysis as belonging to a prominent talent agent who had represented several major stars, explicitly stated that the hippie cult provides perfect misdirection and that Manson's people are expendable assets who will take full responsibility for actions taken on our behalf. The recording also revealed that Sharon Tate had been given multiple warnings to abandon her involvement in her husband's trafficking exposed film. When those warnings were ignored, the decision was made to demonstrate the consequences of interfering with established business relationships. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. The recording included discussion of a target list that extended far beyond Sharon Tate and her friends. The list included at least 20 prominent Hollywood figures who were considered potential threats to the network's operations, actors, directors, producers, and writers who had either stumbled upon evidence of the trafficking operations or had expressed interest in projects that might expose them. According to conversations Santos recorded, the Manson family murders were intended to be the first in a series of high-profile killings that would terrorize the entertainment industry into silence. Each subsequent murder will be blamed on copycat killers inspired by the Manson case, providing perfect cover for eliminating anyone who posed a threat to the network. The plan was only abandoned after the massive law enforcement response to the Tate LaBianca murders made it clear that continued killings would draw too much attention. Instead, the network shifted to other methods of silencing potential threats: career destruction, financial ruin, and when necessary, deaths that could be attributed to accidents, suicides, or drug overdoses. Santos' evidence showed that this pattern had continued for decades. Several suspicious deaths of entertainment industry figures who had been working on projects related to organized crime or human trafficking could be traced back to the same network that had ordered Sharon Tate's murder. The journalists who had been working with Santos began preparing a comprehensive expose that would finally reveal the truth about the Manson family murders and the ongoing criminal network they had been used to protect. But before the story could be published, Santos received a visit from two men who looked remarkably similar to those who had confronted him 50 years earlier. The message was the same: disappear or face the consequences. If you're still watching this, prepare yourself. The final truth about what happened that night in 1969 and what continues to happen today will change everything you thought you knew about power, corruption, and the price of silence in America. Santos had survived 50 years by being careful, by staying hidden, by never trusting anyone completely. But at 72 years old, facing the same threats that had controlled his entire adult life, he made a decision that would either finally expose the truth or cost him everything. Before disappearing again, Santos arranged for all of his evidence to be delivered to multiple journalists, law enforcement agencies, and congressional offices simultaneously. The package included the original documents from 1969, the recording of the planning meeting, financial records showing payments to Manson family members, and a detailed timeline connecting dozens of suspicious deaths to the same network that had ordered the Tate LaBianca murders. The response was swift and predictable. Most recipients of Santos' evidence package reported that the materials were either inconclusive or had been compromised by the passage of time. Several journalists who initially expressed interest in the story were reassigned to other projects or suddenly lost access to key sources. Congressional staffers claimed that the evidence didn't fall under their committee's jurisdiction and referred the matter to agencies that Santos knew were compromised. But Santos had anticipated this reaction. Hidden within his evidence package was information about a contemporary operation, a current criminal network using the same methods and involving some of the same families and organizations that have been connected to the 1969 murders. This wasn't just historical evidence. It was proof of ongoing crimes that were still being committed. The contemporary operation involved what appeared to be a sophisticated child trafficking network operating through various entertainment industry front companies. Young people seeking careers in Hollywood were being recruited through seemingly legitimate talent agencies and modeling companies, then systematically exploited by a network that included several familiar names from Santos's 1969 documents. The most disturbing aspect of Santos's evidence was the revelation that the network had evolved and expanded over the decades, developing connections with similar operations in other countries. What had begun as a regional criminal enterprise had grown into an international organization with the resources and connections to eliminate threats at the highest levels. Santos's final revelation was the most shocking of all. According to documents he had obtained, Charles Manson had not been the network's only asset. Over the years, they had cultivated relationships with numerous criminals and unstable individuals who could be activated when needed to carry out operations while providing plausible deniability for the real organizers. The pattern was always the same. Identify someone with a criminal background and psychological problems, provide them with resources and encouragement to develop extremist ideologies, then direct them toward targets that serve the network's interests. The resulting violence would be attributed to the individual's mental illness or radical beliefs, while the true motives remained hidden. Santos provided evidence suggesting that several high-profile criminal cases from recent decades followed this same pattern. Cases where the official narrative focused on the perpetrator's psychological problems or extremist beliefs, while ignoring evidence of outside assistance and direction. The final recording Santos provided was the most chilling. Made in 2018, it captured a conversation between several individuals discussing the Manson model as a template for future operations. The voices discussed lessons learned from 1969, improvements in methodology, and the advantages of having assets in place within law enforcement and media organizations. One voice on the recording, identified by Santos as belonging to the son of one of the original 1969 conspirators, explicitly stated that the Manson precedent had proven that properly managed chaos creates perfect cover for necessary eliminations. The recording ended with discussion of current problem individuals who were asking too many questions about historical cases, including references to the Mexican janitor and the need to resolve legacy issues before they become contemporary problems. Santos knew that releasing this evidence would likely cost him his life, but he also knew that remaining silent would allow the network to continue operating indefinitely. His final message, recorded on video and distributed along with his evidence, was simple. I have lived in fear for 50 years because I witnessed the truth about Sharon Tate's murder and the network that ordered it. Now I am 72 years old, and I refuse to die knowing that these criminals are still operating, still killing, still protected by the same corruption that has shielded them since 1969. 3 weeks after Santos distributed his evidence package, Mexican authorities reported that he had died in a single-car accident while driving on a remote coastal highway. The crash was attributed to brake failure, and Santos's body was cremated before any independent investigation could be conducted. But Santos had prepared for this possibility. Additional copies of his evidence had been hidden in locations around the world, along with instructions for their release in the event of his death. These materials have since made their way to independent researchers who continue to investigate the connections Santos spent his life documenting. The truth about the Manson family murders isn't just about what happened in 1969. It's about a criminal network that has operated for over half a century, using the same methods and protecting the same interests that led to Sharon Tate's death. Miguel Santos died trying to expose that network, but his evidence remains as his final testimony to a truth that powerful people will kill to keep hidden. Today, as new cases emerge involving entertainment industry figures and trafficking networks, investigators are beginning to recognize patterns that Santos identified decades ago. The names change, the methods evolve, but the basic structure remains the same: a network of criminals protected by corruption, using violence and intimidation to maintain their operations while hiding behind public narratives that deflect attention from their true activities. The question that haunts every serious investigator who has studied Santos's evidence is simple. If this network was powerful enough to orchestrate the Manson family murders and maintain the cover-up for 50 years, what else are they capable of? And more importantly, what are they doing right now? The story of Miguel Santos and the evidence he died protecting isn't just about historical crimes. It's about understanding how organized criminal networks operate within legitimate institutions, how they manipulate public perception through control narratives, and how they maintain power through the systematic elimination threats. Sharon Tate died because she was trying to expose the truth about child trafficking in Hollywood. Miguel Santos died because he witnessed her murder and understood its true significance. Their deaths weren't isolated tragedies. They were casualties in an ongoing war between truth and the forces that profit from keeping it hidden. The network that ordered Sharon Tate's death is still operating. The methods they pioneered in 1969 are still being used, and the corruption that protected them then continues to shield them now. But Miguel Santos' evidence remains, waiting for the right moment, the right investigators, and the right circumstances to finally bring justice to those who have evaded it for over 50 years. The truth about the Manson family murders is just the beginning of a much larger story. A story that continues to unfold today in ways that Santos could never have imagined when he first witnessed those terrifying events on Cielo Drive in 1969. And don't miss our next video. Subscribe to the channel and enter the placelet and follow other stories so intriguing and frightening like this. Click on the screen to watch it now.